The young girl held her brother by the hand and was preparing to go. She stopped. Then Lady Helena, with tearful eye but firm voice and animated features, advanced towards her husband. "Nobly planned. Edward," said she, "when Captain Grant wrote that letter and cast it into the sea, he confided it to the care of God himself, who has brought it to us. Without doubt, he designed to charge us with the safety of these unfortunates." "What do you mean, Helena?" inquired Lord Glenarvan, whilst all waited in silence. "I mean," replied Lady Helena, "that we ought to consider ourselves happy in beginning our married life with a good action. You, my dear Edward, to please me, have planned a pleasure voyage. But what pleasure can be more genuine or more beneficent than to save these unfortunates whom hope has almost abandoned?" "Helena," cried Lord Glenarvan. "Yes, you understand me, Edward. The Duncan is a good, staunch vessel. It can brave the southern seas, it can make the tour of the world, and it will, if necessary. Let us start, Edward. Let us go in search of Captain Grant." At these courageous words, Lord Glenarvan had extended his arms to his wife. He smiled. He pressed her to his heart, while Mary and Robert kissed her hands. And during this touching scene, the servants of the castle, affected and enthusiastic, uttered from their hearts this cry of gratitude. "Hurrah for the Lady of Luss! Hurrah, 3 times hurrah for Lord and Lady Glenarvan!" Chapter 5. The Departure of the Duncan. It has been already said that Lady Helena had a brave and generous soul. What she had just done was an undeniable proof of it, and Lord Glenarvan had good reason to trust in this noble woman, who was capable of comprehending and following him. The idea of sailing to the rescue of Captain Grant had already taken possession of him when he saw his petition rejected at London, but he could not have thought of separating from her. Yet, since she desired to go herself, all hesitation was at an end. The servants of the castle had received her proposal with cries of joy. The safety of their brother Scots was at stake, and Lord Glenarvan joined heartily in the hurrahs that greeted the Lady of Luss. The scheme once resolved upon, there was not an hour to lose. That very day Lord Glenarvan sent to Captain Mangles orders to bring the Duncan to Glasgow, and make every preparation for a voyage to the South Seas, which might become one of circumnavigation. Moreover, in her plans, Lady Helena had not overestimated the qualities of the Duncan. Of first-class construction with regard to strength and swiftness, she could without injury sustain a long voyage. Fitting for sea. The Duncan was a steam yacht of 110 tons burden. She had 2 masts, a foremast with foresail, mainsail, foretop and foretopgallant sails, and a mainmast carrying a mainsail and forestaff. Her rigging was therefore sufficient, and she could profit by the wind like a simple clipper, but she relied especially upon her mechanical power. Her engine was of an effective force of 160 horsepower and was constructed on a new plan. It possessed apparatus for overheating, which gave its steam a very great tension. It was a high-pressure engine and produced motion by a double screw. The Duncan under full steam could acquire a speed equal to any vessel of that day. Indeed, during her trial trip in the Frith of Clyde, she had made, according to the log, 17 knots an hour. She was therefore fully capable of circumnavigating the world, and her captain had only to occupy himself with the internal arrangement. His first care was to increase his storeroom and take in the greatest possible quantity of coal, for it would be difficult to renew their supplies on the voyage. The same precaution was taken with the steward's room, and provisions for 2 years were stowed away. Money, of course, was not wanting, and a pivot gun was furnished, which was fixed at the forecastle. You do not know what may happen, and it is always best to have the means of defense in your reach. Captain Mangles, we must say, understood his business. Although he commanded only a pleasure yacht, he was ranked among the ablest of the Glasgow captains. He was 30 years of age, with rather rough features, indicating courage and kindness. When a child, the Glenarvan family had taken him under their care, and made him an excellent seaman. He had often given proofs of skill, energy, and coolness during his long voyages, and when Lord Glenarvan offered him the command of the Duncan, he accepted it with pride and pleasure, for he loved the Lord of Malcolm Castle as a brother, and until then had vainly sought an opportunity to devote himself to his service. The mate, Tom Austin, was an old sailor worthy of all confidence, and the crew of the Duncan was composed of 25 men, including the captain and mate. They all belonged to the county of Dumbarton, were all tried seamen, sons of the tenants of the family, and formed on shipboard a genuine clan of honest people, who of course were not without the national bagpipe. Lord Glenarvan had in them a band of faithful subjects, happy in their avocation, devoted, courageous, and skillful in the use of arms, as well as in the management of a ship, while they were ready to follow him on the most perilous expeditions. When they learned where they were going, they could not restrain their joyous emotion, and the echoes of the rocks of Dumbarton awoke to their cries of enthusiasm. Captain Mangles, while occupied in lading and provisioning his craft, did not forget to prepare Lord and Lady Glenarvan's apartments for a long voyage. He likewise provided cabins for Captain Grant's children, for Lady Helena could not refuse Mary permission to accompany her on the expedition. As for young Robert, he would have hidden in the hold sooner than not go. Even if he had been compelled to serve as cabin boy, like Lord Nelson and Sir John Franklin, he would have embarked on board the Duncan. To think of opposing such a little gentleman, it was not attempted. They were even obliged to take him other than as passenger, for as cabin boy or sailor he would serve. The captain was accordingly commissioned to teach him the duties of a seaman. "Good," said Robert, "and let him not spare a few blows of the rope's end if I do not walk straight." "Be easy, my boy," replied Glenarvan, without adding that the use of the cat-o'-nine-tails was prohibited, and moreover quite needless, on board the Duncan. Glasgow gossip. To complete the roll of the passengers, it will be sufficient to describe Major MacNab. The Major was a man of 50, of calm, regular features, who did as he was bid, of an excellent and superior character, modest, taciturn, peaceable, and mild, always agreeing with anything or anyone, disputing nothing, and neither contradicting himself nor exaggerating. He would mount with measured step the staircase to his bedchamber, even were a cannonball behind him, and probably to his dying day would never find an opportunity to fly into a passion. This man possessed, in a high degree, not only the common courage of the battlefield, that physical bravery due only to nervous strength, but better still, moral courage, that is to say, firmness of soul. If he had a fault, it was that of being absolutely Scotch from head to foot, a pure-blooded Caledonian, an infatuated observer of the ancient customs of his country. Through his relationship to the Glenarvans, he lived at Malcolm Castle, and as major and military man it was very natural that he should be found on board the Duncan. Such, then, were the passengers of this yacht, summoned by unforeseen circumstances to accomplish one of the most surprising voyages of modern times. Since her arrival at the wharf at Glasgow, she had monopolized the public attention. A considerable number came every day to visit her. They were interested in her alone and spoke only of her, to the great umbrage of the other captains of the port, among others Captain Burton, commanding the Scotia, a magnificent steamer, moored beside the Duncan and bound for Calcutta. The Scotia, from her size, had a right to consider the Duncan as a mere flyboat. Nevertheless, all the attractions centered in Lord Glenarvan's yacht, and increased from day to day. The time of departure approached. Captain Mangles had shown himself skillful and expeditious. A month after her trial trip in the Frith of Clyde, the Duncan, laden, provisioned, and equipped, was ready to put to sea. The 25th of August was appointed for the time of departure, which would enable the yacht to reach the southern latitudes by the beginning of spring. Lord Glenarvan, when his plan was matured, did not neglect to make investigations into the hardships and perils of the voyage. Yet he did not hesitate on this account, but prepared to leave Malcolm Castle. On the 24th of August, Lord and Lady Glenarvan, Major MacNab, Mary and Robert Grant, Mr. Albinett, the steward of the yacht, and his wife, who was in the service of Lady Glenarvan, left the castle, after taking an affectionate farewell of their family servants. Several hours afterward they found themselves on board. Many of the population of Glasgow welcomed with sympathetic admiration the young and courageous lady who renounced the pleasures of a life of luxury and sailed to the rescue of the shipwrecked sailors. The apartments of Lord Glenarvan and his wife occupied the entire stern of the vessel. They consisted of 2 bedchambers, a parlor, and 2 dressing rooms, adjoining which was an open square enclosed by 6 cabins, 5 of which were occupied by Mary and Robert Grant, Mr. and Mrs. Albinett, and Major MacNab. As for the cabins of the captain and the mate, they were situated in the forecastle and opened on the deck. The crew were lodged between decks very comfortably, for the yacht of course carried nothing but her coal, provisions, and armament. The Duncan was to start on the night of the 24th, as the tide fell at 3 o'clock in the morning. But first those who were present were witness to a touching scene. At 8 in the evening, Lord Glenarvan and his companions, the entire crew, from the fireman to the captain, all who were to take part in this voyage of sacrifice, left the yacht, and betook themselves to St. Mungo, the ancient cathedral of Glasgow. This antique church, an uninjured relic in the midst of the ruins caused by the Reformation, and so marvelously described by Walter Scott, received beneath its massive arches the owners and sailors of the Duncan. Prayer and progress. A numerous throng accompanied them. There in the spacious aisle, filled with tombs of the great and good, the Rev. Mr. Morton implored the blessing of heaven and commended the expedition to the care of Providence. For a moment the voice of Mary Grant arose in the old church. The young girl was praying for her benefactors and shedding before God the sweet tears of gratitude. The assembly retired under the influence of a deep emotion. At 11, everyone was on board. The captain and the crew occupied themselves with the final preparations. At midnight the fires were kindled, and soon clouds of black smoke mingled with the vapors of the night. The sails of the Duncan had been carefully reefed in a canvas sheathing, which served to protect them from injury. The wind blew from the southeast, and did not favor the progress of the vessel. But at 2 o'clock the ship began to heave under the action of her boilers. The manometer indicated a pressure of 4 atmospheres, and the overheated steam whistled through the escape valves. The sea was tranquil, and soon daylight enabled them to distinguish the passes of the Clyde between the buoys and beacons, whose lights were gradually extinguished as the morning dawned. Captain Mangles informed Lord Glenarvan, who at once came on deck. Very soon the ebb tide was felt. The Duncan gave a few shrill whistles, slackened her cables, and separated from the surrounding vessels. Her screw was set in motion, which propelled her into the channel of the river. The captain had taken no pilot. He was perfectly acquainted with the navigation of the Clyde, and no one could have commanded better. At a sign from him, the yacht started. With his right hand he controlled the engine, and with his left the tiller, with silent but unerring skill. The Rev. Mr. Morton implored the blessing of heaven, and commended the expedition to the care of Providence. A change of scene. Soon the last workshops on the shore gave place to villas, built here and there upon the hills, and the sounds of the city died away in the distance. An hour afterwards, the Duncan passed the rocks of Dumbarton. 2 hours later she was in the Frith of Clyde, and at 6 o'clock in the morning she doubled Cantor Point, emerged from the North Channel, and gained the open sea. Chapter 6. An unexpected passenger. During the first day's voyage the sea was quite rough, and the wind freshened towards evening. The Duncan rolled considerably, so that the ladies did not appear on deck, but very wisely remained in their cabins. The next day the wind changed a point, and the captain set the main, fore, and foretopsails, thus causing less perception of the rolling and pitching motion. Lady Helena and Mary Grant were able before daybreak to join Lord Glenarvan, the major, and the captain on deck. The sunrise was magnificent. The orb of day, like a gilded metal disc, rose from the ocean, as from an immense and silvery basin. The ship glided in the midst of a splendid iridescence, and you would truly have thought that her sails expanded under the influence of the sun's rays, whilst even the crew of the yacht silently admired this reappearance of the orb of day. "What a magnificent spectacle," said Lady Helena at last. "This is the beginning of a beautiful day. May the wind not prove contrary, but favor the progress of the Duncan." "No better weather could be desired, my dear Helena," replied Lord Glenarvan. "We have no reason to complain of the commencement of the voyage." "Will it be a long one, my dear Edward?" "That is for the captain to answer," said he. "Are we progressing well? Are you satisfied with your vessel, Captain?" "Very well indeed," was the answer. "She is a marvelous craft, and a sailor likes to feel her under his feet. Never were hull and engine more in unison. See how smooth her wake is, and how easily she rides the waves. We are moving at the rate of 17 knots an hour. If this continues, we shall cross the line in 10 days, and in 5 weeks shall double Cape Horn." "You hear, Mary," said Lady Helena, "in 5 weeks." "Yes," replied the young girl, "I hear," and my heart beat quickly at the words of the captain. "And how do you bear this voyage, Miss Mary?" inquired Lord Glenarvan. "Very well, my lord. I do not experience very many discomforts. Besides, I shall soon be accustomed to it." "And young Robert?" "Compliments and congratulations." "Oh, Robert," replied Captain Mangles, When he is not engaged with the engine he is perched at masthead. I tell you he is a boy who mocks seasickness. Only look at him." At a gesture of the captain, all eyes were turned towards the mainmast, and every one could perceive Robert, suspended by the stays of the foretopgallant sail, 100 feet aloft. Mary could not restrain a motion of fear. "Oh, be easy, miss," said Captain Mangles. "I will answer for him, and promise you I will present, in a short time, a famous sailor to Captain Grant, for we shall find that worthy captain." "May heaven hear you, sir," replied the young girl. "My dear child," said Lord Glenarvan, "there is in all this something providential which ought to give us hope. We are not merely going, we are led. We are not seeking blindly, we are guided. And then see all these brave people enrolled in the service of so good a cause. Not only shall we succeed in our enterprise, but it will be accomplished without difficulty. I have promised Lady Helena a pleasure voyage, and if I am not mistaken, I shall keep my word." "Edward," said Lady Glenarvan, "you are the best of men." "Not so, but I have the best of crews on the best of ships. Do you not wonder at our Duncan, Miss Mary?" "On the contrary, my lord," answered the young girl, "I don't so much wonder as admire, for I am well acquainted with ships." "Ah, indeed. When a mere child, I played on my father's ships. He ought to have made a sailor of me. If it were necessary, perhaps I should not now be embarrassed in taking a reef or twisting a gasket." "What is that you're saying, miss?" exclaimed the captain. "If you talk so," continued Lord Glenarvan, "you will make a great friend of Captain John, for he thinks nothing in the world can equal the life of a sailor. He sees no other, even for a woman. Is it not so, John?" "Undoubtedly, your lordship," replied the young captain. "And yet, I confess, Miss Grant is better in her place on deck than taking a reef in the topsail. But still I am very much flattered to hear her speak so." "And especially when she admires the Duncan," added Glenarvan. "Right, my lord, for she deserves it." "Upon my word," said Lady Helena, "since you are so proud of your yacht, you make me anxious to examine her to the very hold, and see how our brave sailors are quartered between decks." "Admirably," replied the captain, "they are quite at home there." "Indeed they are, my dear Helena," said Lord Glenarvan. "This yacht is a part of our old Caledonia, a detached portion of the county of Dumbarton, travelling by special favour, so that we have not left our country. The Duncan is Malcolm Castle, and the ocean is Loch Lomond." "Well then, my dear Edward, do the honours of the castle," said Lady Helena. "I am at your disposal, madam," answered her husband, "but first let me inform Albinett." The steward of the yacht was an excellent manager, a Scotchman, who deserved to have been a Frenchman from his self-importance, and moreover, fulfilled his duties with zeal and intelligence. He was at once ready for his master's commands. "Albinett, we are going to make a tour of the vessel before breakfast," said Glenarvan, as if a journey to Tarbet or Loch Katrine was in question. "I hope we shall find the table ready on our return." Albinett bowed gravely. This man, tall, lank, and shriveled, might have been 40 years old. He resembled a long, broad-headed nail, for his head was large and thick, his forehead high, his nose prominent, his mouth wide, and his chin blunt. "Do you accompany us, Major?" asked Lady Helena. "If you order it," replied MacNab. "Oh," said Lord Glenarvan, "the Major is absorbed in the smoke of his cigar. We must not disturb him, for I assure you he is an inveterate smoker, Miss Mary. He smokes all the time, even in his sleep." The Major made a sign of assent, and the passengers descended between decks. MacNab remained alone, talking to himself, according to his custom, but never contradicting himself. Enveloped in a dense cloud of smoke, he stood motionless, gazing back at the wake of the yacht. After a few moments of contemplation, he turned and found himself face to face with a new character. If anything could have surprised him, it must have been this meeting, for the passenger was absolutely unknown to him. A telescopic apparition. This man, tall, lank, and shriveled, might have been 40 years old. He resembled a long, broad-headed nail, for his head was large and thick, his forehead high, his nose prominent, his mouth wide, and his chin blunt. As for his eyes, they were hidden behind enormous eyeglasses, and his look seemed to have that indecision peculiar to nyctalopes. His countenance indicated an intelligent and lively person, while it had not the crabbed air of those stern people who from principle never laugh, and whose stupidity is hidden beneath a serious guise. The nonchalance and amiable freedom of this unknown nonentity clearly proved that he knew how to take men and things at their best advantage. Even without his speaking, you felt that he was a talker. But he was abstracted, after the manner of those who do not see what they are looking at or hear what they are listening to. He wore a traveling cap, stout yellow buskins and leather gaiters, pantaloons of maroon velvet, and a jacket of the same material, whose innumerable pockets seemed stuffed with notebooks, memoranda, scraps, portfolios, and 1,000 articles as inconvenient as they were useless, not to speak of a telescope which he carried in a sling. The curiosity of this unknown being was a singular contrast to the calmness of the Major. He walked around MacNab and gazed at him questioningly, whilst the latter did not trouble himself whence the stranger came, whither he was going, or why he was on board the Duncan. When this enigmatical character saw his approaches mocked by the indifference of the Major, he seized his telescope, which at its full length measured 4 feet, and motionless, with legs straddled, like a signpost on a highway, he pointed his instrument to the line where sky and water met. After a few moments of examination, he lowered it, and resting it on the deck, leaned upon it as upon a cane. But immediately the joints of the instrument closed, and the newly discovered passenger, whose point of support suddenly failed, was stretched at the foot of the mainmast. Anyone else in the Major's place would at least have smiled, but he did not even wink. The unknown then assumed his role. "Steward," he cried, with an accent that betokened a foreigner. He waited, no one appeared. "Steward," he repeated in a louder tone. Mr. Albinett was passing just then on his way to the kitchen under the forecastle. What was his astonishment to hear himself thus addressed by this tall individual, who was utterly unknown to him. "Where did this person come from?" said he to himself. "A friend of Lord Glenarvan, it is impossible." However, he came on deck, and approached the stranger. "Are you the steward of the vessel?" the latter asked him. "Yes, sir," replied Albinett, "but I have not the honor." "I am the passenger of cabin number 6. "Number 6, repeated the steward. "Certainly, and your name is?" "Albinett." "Well, Albinett, my friend," answered the stranger of cabin number 6, "I must think of dinner, and acutely, too. For 36 hours I have eaten nothing, or rather have slept, which is pardonable in a man come all the way from Paris to Glasgow. What hour do you dine, if you please?" "At 9 o'clock, answered Albinett mechanically. The stranger attempted to consult his watch, but this took some time, for he did not find it till he came to his 9th pocket. Confusion worse confounded. "Well," said he, "it is not yet 8 o'clock. Therefore, Albinett, a biscuit and a glass of sherry for the present, for I am fainting with hunger." Albinett listened without understanding. Moreover, the unknown kept talking, and passed from one subject to another with extreme volubility. "Well," said he, "has not the captain risen yet? And the mate, what is he doing? Is he asleep too? Fortunately, the weather is beautiful, the wind favorable, and the ship goes on quite by herself." Just as he said this, Captain Mangles appeared at the companionway. "Here is the captain," said Albinett. "Ah, I am delighted," cried the stranger, "delighted to make your acquaintance, Captain Burton." If anyone was ever astounded, John Mangles certainly was, not less at hearing himself called Captain Burton than at seeing this stranger on board his vessel. The latter continued, with more animation. "Permit me to shake hands with you, and if I did not do so day before yesterday, it was that no one might be embarrassed at the moment of departure. But today, Captain, I am truly happy to meet you." Captain Mangles opened his eyes in measureless astonishment, looking first at Albinett, and then at the newcomer. "Now," continued the latter, "the introduction is over and we are old friends. Let us have a talk, and tell me, are you satisfied with the Scotia?" "What do you mean by the Scotia?" asked the captain at last. "Why, the Scotia that carries us. A good ship, whose commander, the brave Captain Burton, I have heard praised no less for his physical than his moral qualities. Are you the father of the great African traveler of that name? If so, my compliments." "Sir," replied Captain Mangles, "not only am I not the father of the traveler Burton, but I am not even Captain Burton." "Ah," said the unknown, "it is the mate of the Scotia then, Mr. Birdness, whom I am addressing at this moment." Mr. Birdness, replied Captain Mangles, who began to suspect the truth. But was he talking to a fool or a rogue? This was a question in his mind, and he was about to explain himself intelligibly when Lord Glenarvan, his wife, and Miss Grant came on deck. The stranger perceived them, and cried, "Ah, passengers, passengers, excellent! I hope, Mr. Birdness, you are going to introduce me." And advancing with perfect ease, without waiting for the captain. "Madam," said he to Miss Grant, "Miss to Lady Helena, sir," he added, addressing Lord Glenarvan. "Lord Glenarvan," said Captain Mangles. "My lord," continued the unknown, "I beg your pardon for introducing myself, but at sea we must relax a little from etiquette. I hope we shall soon be acquainted, and that, in the society of these ladies, the passage of the Scotia will seem as short to us as agreeable." Lady Helena and Miss Grant could not find a word to answer. They were completely bewildered by the presence of this intruder. "Sir," said Glenarvan at length, "whom have I the honor of addressing?" "Jacques Eliasim François Marie Paganel, Secretary of the Geographical Society of Paris, corresponding member of the Societies of Berlin, Bombay, Darmstadt, Leipzig, London, St. Petersburg, Vienna, and New York, honorary member of the Royal Geographical and Ethnographical Institute of the East Indies, who, after passing 20 years of his life in studying geography, designs now to enter upon a roving life, and is directing his course to India to continue there the labors of the great travelers." Chapter 7. Jacques Paganel is undeceived. The Secretary of the Geographical Society must have been an agreeable person, for all this was said with much modesty. Lord Glenarvan, moreover, knew perfectly whom he had met. The name and merit of Jacques Paganel were well known to him. His geographical labors, his reports on modern discoveries, published in the bulletins of the Society, his correspondence with the entire world, had made him one of the most distinguished scientific men of France. Thus Glenarvan extended his hand very cordially to his unexpected guest. "And now that our introduction is over," added he, "will you permit me, Monsieur Paganel, to ask you a question?" "20, my lord," replied Jacques Paganel. "It will always be a pleasure to converse with you." "You arrived on board this vessel the day before yesterday?" "Yes, my lord, day before yesterday at 8 o'clock in the evening. I took a cab from the Caledonian Railway to the Scotia, in which I had engaged cabin number 6 at Paris. The night was dark. I saw no one on board. Feeling fatigued by 30 hours of travel, and knowing that a good way to avoid seasickness is to go to bed on embarking, and not stir from your bunk for the first days of the voyage, I retired immediately, and have conscientiously slept 36 hours, I assure you." Jacques Paganel's hearers now knew the reason of his presence on board. The Frenchman, mistaking the vessel, had embarked while the crew of the Duncan were engaged in the ceremony at St. Mungo. Everything was explained. But what would the geographer say when he learned the name and destination of the vessel on which he had taken passage? "So, Monsieur Paganel," said Glenarvan, "you have chosen Calcutta as your center of action." "Yes, my lord. To see India is an idea that I have cherished all my life. It is my brightest dream, which shall be realized at last in the country of the elephants and the thugs." "Then you would not care to visit another country?" "No, my lord. It would be even disagreeable, for I have letters from Lord Somerset to the Governor-General of India, and a mission from the Geographical Society which I must fulfill." "Ah, you have a mission." "Yes, a useful and curious voyage to undertake, the program of which has been arranged by my scientific friend and colleague, M. Vivian de Saint Martin. It is to follow in the steps of the brothers Schlagentweit and many other celebrated travelers. I hope to succeed where missionary Crick unfortunately failed in 1846. In a word, I wish to discover the course of the Yarut-Sangboat Sioux, which waters Thibet, and finally to settle whether this river does not join the Brahmaputra in the northeast part of Assam. A gold medal is promised to that traveler who shall succeed in supplying this much-needed information on Indian geography." Paganel was grandiloquent. He spoke with a lofty animation and was carried away in the rapid flight of imagination. It would have been as impossible to check him as to stay the Rhine at the falls of Schaffhausen. "Monsieur Jacques Paganel," said Lord Glenarvan, after a moment of silence, "that is certainly a fine voyage, and one for which science would be very grateful, but I will not further prolong your ignorance. For the present, you must give up the pleasure of seeing India." Paganel was grandiloquent. He spoke with a lofty animation and was carried away in the rapid flight of imagination. "Give it up, and why?" "Because you are turning your back upon the Indian peninsula." "How, Captain Burton?" "I am not Captain Burton," replied John Mangles, "but the Scotia." "This vessel is not the Scotia." Paganel's amazement cannot be depicted. He looked first at Lord Glenarvan, always serious, then at Lady Helena and Miss Grant, whose features expressed a sympathetic disappointment, and finally at Captain Mangles, who was smiling, and the imperturbable Major. Then, raising his shoulders and drawing down his glasses from his forehead to his eyes, he exclaimed, "What a joke!" But at that his eyes fell upon the steering wheel, on which were inscribed these two words, thus: "The Duncan, the Duncan!" He cried in a tone of real despair, and leaping down the companionway, he rushed to his cabin. When the unfortunate geographer had disappeared, no one on board, except the Major, could retain gravity, and the laugh was communicated even to the sailors. To mistake the railroad was not so bad. To take the train to Dumbarton instead of Edinburgh would do. But to mistake the vessel and be sailing to Chile when he wished to go to India was the height of absent-mindedness. Absent-mindedness. "On the whole, I am not astonished at this on the part of Jacques Paganel," said Glenarvan. "He is noted for such blunders. He once published a celebrated map of America in which he located Japan. However, he is a distinguished scholar and one of the best geographers of France." "But what are we going to do with the poor gentleman?" asked Lady Helena. "We cannot take him to Patagonia." "Why not?" replied MacNab gravely. "We are not responsible for his errors. Suppose he were in a railroad car, would it stop for him?" "No, but he could get out at the first station," answered Lady Helena. "Well," said Glenarvan, "he can do so now, if he pleases, at our first landing." At this moment Paganel, woeful and humble, reappeared on deck, after convincing himself that his baggage was on board. He kept repeating those fatal words, "The Duncan, the Duncan." He could find no others in his vocabulary. He went to and fro, examining the rigging of the yacht, and questioning the mute horizon of the open sea. At last he returned to Lord Glenarvan. "And this Duncan is going?" he asked. "To America, Monsieur Paganel." "And where especially?" "To Conception." To Chile," cried the unfortunate geographer. "And my mission to India, but what will M. de Quatrefages say, the president of the Central Commission? How shall I represent myself at the sessions of the Society?" "Courtesy and converse." "Come, monsieur," said Glenarvan, "do not despair. Everything can be arranged, and you will only have to submit to a delay of little consequence. The Yarutsang boat Sioux will wait for you in the mountains of Thibet. We shall soon reach Madeira, and there you will find a vessel to take you back to Europe." "I thank you, my lord, and must be resigned. But we can say this is an extraordinary adventure, which would not have happened but for me, and my cabin which is engaged on board the Scotia." "Oh, as for the Scotia, I advise you to give her up for the present." "But," said Paganel after examining the vessel again, "the Duncan is a pleasure yacht." "Yes, sir," replied Captain Mangles, "and belongs to his lordship Lord Glenarvan." "Who begs you to make free use of his hospitality," said Glenarvan. "1,000 thanks, my lord," replied Paganel. "I am truly sensible to your courtesy, but permit me to make a simple remark. India is a beautiful country. It offers marvelous surprises to travelers. These ladies have probably never visited it. Well, the man at the helm needs only to give a turn to the wheel, and the Duncan will go as easily to Calcutta as Conception. Now, since this is a pleasure voyage." The negative reception that met Paganel's proposal did not permit him to develop it. He paused. "Monsieur Paganel," said Lady Helena at length, "if this were only a pleasure voyage, I would answer, 'Let us all go to India,' and Lord Glenarvan would not disapprove. But the Duncan is going to recover some shipwrecked sailors, abandoned on the coast of Patagonia, and she cannot change so humane a course." In a few moments the Frenchman was acquainted with the situation of affairs, and learned, not without emotion, the providential discovery of the documents, the story of Captain Grant, and Lady Helena's generous proposal. "Madam," said he, "permit me to admire your conduct in all this, and to admire it without reserve. May your yacht continue on her course. I would reproach myself for delaying her a single day." "Will you then join in our search?" asked Lady Helena. "It is impossible, madam. I must fulfill my mission. I shall disembark at your first landing." "At Madeira then," said Captain Mangles. "At Madeira let it be. I shall be only 180 leagues from Lisbon, and will wait there for means of further conveyance." "Well, Monsieur Paganel," said Glenarvan, "it shall be as you desire, and for my part, I am happy that I can offer you for a few days the hospitalities of my vessel. May you not grow weary of our company." "Oh, my lord," exclaimed the geographer, "I am still too happy in being so agreeably disappointed. However, it is a very ludicrous situation for a man who takes passage for India and is sailing to America." In spite of this mortifying reflection, Paganel made the best use of a delay that he could not avoid. He showed himself amiable and even gay. He enchanted the ladies with his good humor, and before the end of the day he was the friend of every one. At his request, the famous document was shown to him. He studied it carefully, long and minutely. No other interpretation appeared to him possible. Mary Grant and her brother inspired him with the liveliest interest. He gave them good hopes. His way of distinguishing the events, and the undeniable success that he predicted for the Duncan, elicited a smile from the young girl. This or that or neither. As to Lady Helena, when he learned that she was the daughter of William Tufnell, there was an outburst of surprise and admiration. He had known her father. What a bold discoverer! How many letters they had exchanged when the latter was corresponding member of the society. He it was who had introduced him to M. Maltbrun. What a meeting, and how much pleasure to travel with the daughter of such a man. Finally, he asked Lady Helena's permission to kiss her, to which she consented, although it was perhaps a little improper. Chapter 8. The Geographer's Resolution. Meanwhile the yacht, favored by the currents, was advancing rapidly towards the equator. In a few days the island of Madeira came in view. Glenarvan, faithful to his promise, offered to land his new guest here. "My dear lord," replied Paganel, "I will not be formal with you. Before my arrival on board, did you intend to stop at Madeira?" "No," said Glenarvan. "Well, permit me to profit by the consequences of my unlucky blunder. Madeira is an island too well known. Everything has been said and written about it, and it is, moreover, rapidly declining in point of civilization. If then, it is all the same to you, let us land at the Canaries." "Very well, at the Canaries," replied Glenarvan. "That will not take us out of our way." "I know it, my dear lord. At the Canaries, you see, there are 3 groups to study, not to speak of the Peak of Teneriffe, which I have always desired to see. This is a fine opportunity. I will profit by it, and while waiting for a vessel, will attempt the ascent of this celebrated mountain." "As you please, my dear Paganel," replied Glenarvan, who could not help smiling, and with good reason. The Canaries are only a short distance from Madeira, scarcely 250 miles, a mere trifle for so good a vessel as the Duncan. The same day, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Captain Mangles and Paganel were walking on the deck. The Frenchman pressed his companion with lively questions concerning Chile. All at once the captain interrupted him, and pointing towards the southern horizon, said, "Mr. Paganel." "My dear captain," replied the geographer, "please cast your eyes in that direction. Do you see nothing?" "Nothing." "You are not looking right. It is not on the horizon, but above in the clouds." "In the clouds, I look in vain." "Stop now, just on a line with the end of the bowsprit." "I see nothing." "You do not wish to see. However that may be, although we are 40 miles distant, you understand, the Peak of Teneriffe is visible above the horizon." Whether Paganel wished to see or not, he had to yield to the evidence some hours afterwards, or at least confess himself blind. "You perceive it now," said his companion. "Yes, yes, perfectly," replied Paganel. "And that," added he in a contemptuous tone, "is what you call the Peak of Teneriffe." "The same." "It appears to be of very moderate height. Yet it is 11,000 feet above the level of the sea." "Not so high as Mont Blanc." "Very possibly, but when you come to climb it, you will find it perhaps high enough." They could scarcely see the city, which was on an elevated plain in the form of a terrace, resting on volcanic rocks 300 feet in height. The appearance of the island through this rainy curtain was misty. "Oh, climate, my dear captain. What is the use, I ask you, after Humboldt and Bonpland? What can I do after these great men?" "Peak of Teneriffe." "Indeed," replied Captain Mangles, "there is nothing left but to wander about. It is a pity, for you would be very tired waiting for a vessel at Teneriffe. You cannot look for many distractions there." "Except my own," said Paganel, laughing. "But, my dear captain, have not the Cape Verde Islands important landings?" "Certainly, nothing is easier than to land at Villapraya." "Not to speak of an advantage that is not to be despised," answered Paganel, "that the Cape Verde Islands are not far from Senegal, where I shall find fellow countrymen." "As you please, Mr. Paganel," replied Captain Mangles. "I am certain that geographical science will gain by your sojourn in these islands. We must land there to take in coal. You will, therefore, cause us no delay." "Declined with thanks." So saying, the captain gave the order to pass to the southeast of the Canaries. The celebrated peak was soon left on the larboard, and the Duncan, continuing her rapid course, cut the Tropic of Cancer the next morning at 5 o'clock. The weather there changed. The atmosphere had the moisture and oppressiveness of the rainy season, disagreeable to travelers, but beneficial to the inhabitants of the African islands, who have no trees, and consequently need water. The sea was boisterous, and prevented the passengers from remaining on deck, but the conversation in the cabin was not less animated. The next day Paganel began to collect his baggage preparatory to his approaching departure. In a short time, they entered the Bay of Villapraya, and anchored opposite the city in 8 fathoms of water. The weather was stormy and the surf high, although the bay was sheltered from the winds. The rain fell in torrents so that they could scarcely see the city, which was on an elevated plain in the form of a terrace, resting on volcanic rocks 300 feet in height. The appearance of the island through this rainy curtain was misty. Shipping the coal was not accomplished without great difficulty, and the passengers saw themselves confined to the cabin, while sea and sky mingled their waters in an indescribable tumult. The weather was, therefore, the topic of conversation on board. Each one had his say except the major, who would have witnessed the deluge itself with perfect indifference. Paganel walked to and fro, shaking his head. "It is an imperative fact," said he. "It is certain," replied Glenarvan, "that the elements declare themselves against you." "I will see about that." "You cannot face such a storm," said Lady Helena. "Ay, madam, certainly. I fear only for my baggage and instruments. They will all be lost." "Our landing is the only thing doubtful," resumed Glenarvan. "Once at Villapraya, you will not have very uncomfortable quarters, rather uncleanly, to be sure, in the company of monkeys and swine, whose surroundings are not always agreeable. But a traveler does not regard that so critically. Besides, you can hope in 7 or 8 months to embark for Europe." "7 or 8 months," exclaimed Paganel. "At least that. The Cape Verde Islands are very rarely frequented during the rainy season, but you can employ your time profitably. This archipelago is still little known. There is much to do, even now." "But," replied Paganel in a pitiful tone, "what could I do after the investigations of the geologist Deville?" "That is really a pity," said Lady Helena. "What will become of you, Monsieur Paganel?" Paganel was silent for a few moments. "You had decidedly better have landed at Madeira," rejoined Glenarvan, "although there is no wine there." "My dear Glenarvan," continued Paganel at last, "where shall you land next?" "At Conception." "Alas, but that would bring me directly away from India." "No, for when you have passed Cape Horn you approach the Indies." "I very much doubt it." "Besides," continued Glenarvan with the greatest gravity, "as long as you are at the Indies, what difference does it make whether they are the East or the West?" "What difference does it make?" "The inhabitants of the Pampas of Patagonia are Indians as well as the natives of the Punjab." "Eh, my lord," exclaimed Paganel, "that is a reason I should never have imagined. Bait for a traveler. And then, my dear Paganel, you know that you can gain the gold medal in any country whatever. There is something to do, to seek, to discover, everywhere, in the chains of the Cordilleras as well as the mountains of Thibet." "But the course of the Yarratsangbo Tzu?" "Certainly, you can replace that by the Rio Colorado. This is a river very little known, and one of those which flow on the map too much according to the fancy of the geographer. I know it, my dear lord, there are errors of several degrees. I do not doubt that at my request the Society would have sent me to Patagonia as well as to India, but I did not think of it. The result of your continual abstraction. Well, Monsieur Paganel, shall you accompany us? Asked Lady Helena in her most persuasive tone. And my mission, madam? I inform you that we shall pass through the Strait of Magellan, continued Glenarvan. My lord, you're a tempter. I add that we shall visit Port Famine. Port Famine, cried the Frenchman, assailed on all sides, that port so celebrated in geographical fasts. Consider also, Monsieur Paganel, continued Lady Helena, that in this enterprise you will have the right to associate the name of France with that of Scotland. Yes, doubtless. A geographer may be very serviceable to our expedition, and what is more noble than for science to enlist in the service of humanity? That is well said, madam. Believe me, try chance or rather providence. Imitate us. It has sent us this document, we have started. It has cast you on board the Duncan, do not leave her. And do you indeed wish me, my good friends? Replied Paganel. Well, you desire me to stay very much. And you, Paganel, you are dying to stay, retorted Glenarvan.